Welcome back to Session 2 of Mood Matters. In Session 1, we looked at some of the common signs and symptoms of depression and how depression can affect our thoughts, feelings and behaviours in unhelpful ways to create a vicious circle. What we want to do throughout the Mood Matters course is to help you to weaken this circle. In the previous session, we discussed the benefits of exercise and becoming more active in helping to improve our mood. We suggested that perhaps you try 30 minutes of exercise over 3 days during the week. Did you manage this? If you did, well done. Did you notice any changes in your mood as a result? If you didn't manage to try some exercise, then why not make this your goal for next week? It's never too late to make a start. In today's session then, what we will focus on is our values and how we can use our values to guide meaningful activity and helpful behaviour. We'll also explore activity tracking and how this can help us to identify unhelpful behaviours which simply keep the vicious circle of depression going. Take a few moments to consider what the word values means to you. What do you associate with this word? What springs to mind? A useful definition of values might be to hold something in high regard based on its worth, desirability, usefulness, esteem or prize. So our values are things in our life that we hold dear, that we regard to be very important and/or which mean a lot to us, for example, our family, our friends, our work, etc. These are things that we may hold of personal value to us. So why are values important? Well, our values define who we are and often guide the decisions that we make. Values are also important in changing our outlook on life and can drive us to make changes. This is important because when we are depressed, we often lack motivation and lose sight of the things that we value in life. We may even begin to believe that our life is meaningless. By starting to consider what is actually important to us in life and what makes our life fulfilling, we can start to make meaningful changes in our activities, relationships and friendships, etc. And by doing so, improve our outlook and our mood. If we look at this cycle, we can see that when we are depressed, we often have less motivation to do the things that we value. This can gradually lead to a sense that life has no meaning or purpose, which in turn tends to feed into depression, and so the cycle continues unless we break the cycle by making some changes. Take a few moments to consider the things that you value in your life. You may wish to note these down. Here is a list of some of the life components that you may value in your life and which you may have already written down. Have a look at the list and add any of your own if they aren't already there. It may be helpful to use the Values for Living Questionnaire 1 for this exercise. Go through the list of life components on the Values for Living Questionnaire 1 and rate the importance of each component on a scale of 0 to 10, with 0 being not important at all and 10 being extremely important. Try to rate them honestly according to your true feelings and not what you think you should rate them. Now, using Values for Living Questionnaire 2, go through the list of life components again, but this time ask yourself how much effort you are giving to the needs of each area. Again, using a scale of 0 to 10, with 0 being no effort at all and 10 being extreme effort, rate how much effort you put into each life component. When you have rated how important each life component is to you and how much effort you are currently putting into each of these areas, try to compare your answers. What did you find? Are you surprised at what you value most or least? Do your efforts fall short on areas that you have rated highly for importance? Do you put a lot of effort into values that are less important to you? Or perhaps you found that your efforts are in line with your values in some areas of your life. What we want to focus on for the moment is areas in your life that perhaps you value highly, so those you have rated as important, but that you are not currently putting much effort into. Ask yourself why this might be. What barriers or challenges stop you from putting effort into areas that you value? Are these areas beyond your control? Is there any part of it you could take control of? You may wish to use the worksheet entitled Overcoming Barriers to help you with this exercise. Overcoming barriers or excuses that hold us back from living up to our values is important if we want to start overcoming depression. Writing down how you plan to make changes in the areas that you value can help you to think about ways to make your life more meaningful. This is a key step to improving the way that you feel about your life. So what will you do? At this point, you may wish to look at the worksheet entitled Committed Action. Pick one of the life components that you feel you need to work on and write it down, for example, self-care. Then think about one goal that would be helpful to work on for this life component and write it down, for example, to start doing some exercise. Then think of and write down a few actions that you could take to move closer to this goal. For example, go swimming with the kids once a week, take the dog on extended walks around the park, take the stairs instead of the lift at work. It is important that you are realistic about the goals that you're setting for yourself. Are your goals achievable? Would you be able to do them? Don't try to take on too much, otherwise you will just overwhelm yourself. You are more likely to achieve your goals if you start off small, and anyway, small goals are as good as any. Now we're going to move on to part 2 of the session. So although we have looked at values as a way to guide us to helpful behaviour, it is also important to start to identify our unhelpful behaviour. As human beings, much of what we do is automatic. We don't tend to give it much thought, we just do it. For example, driving a car. In the same way, much of what we do can become a habit. For example, having a coffee first thing in the morning. Sometimes the behaviours that we engage in can be very unhelpful and merely feed our depression. Therefore, it is important to start to recognise and identify our unhelpful behaviour, and also when we do it, so that we can start to make some positive changes. Identifying our unhelpful behaviours and when we do them can be very difficult. Therefore, it can help to track what we do using an activity monitoring chart. Let's look at an example to illustrate. This is Sam's chart, which we have started to give you an idea of what an activity monitoring chart would look like. So from this, we can see that for each hour time slot throughout the day, Sam has written down a couple of words about what he is doing, who he is with and where. When you're filling out your chart, it is a good idea to be as specific as possible about what you're doing. So for example, rather than saying that you're at home, write down what you are doing at home. So for example, watching television. On page 1 of the worksheet entitled Activity Trackers, you will find a black activity monitoring chart similar to Sam's. Take some time to write down what you were doing yesterday at each point in the day, being as specific as possible. How did you find this? Was it easy? Difficult? What, if anything, did you find tricky? Some people find it quite difficult to remember what they did yesterday. It can be really tricky to be specific. This is why we advise that when you're filling out your chart, you do it on the day as near to the time as possible. In order to find out what behaviours are unhelpful, we have to know how our behaviours affect our mood. This means that as well as tracking your activity throughout the day, we also have to record our mood state. So for each activity that you did yesterday, try to rate your mood at the time using a scale of 0 to 10, with 0 being most happy, least anxious and stressed and so on, and 10 being most depressed, most anxious, most stressed and so on. Again, you may find this tricky to do because it can be difficult to remember how you felt at each point throughout the day. So again, this is why it's helpful to fill out an activity monitoring chart at regular intervals throughout the day. Do you notice any patterns or link between what you were doing and how you felt? We will consider behaviour mood links in more detail in session 3. On page 2 of the worksheet entitled Activity Trackers, you will find a blank activity monitoring chart which you can use to track your activity and mood state over the next week. Here is an example to give you an idea. So this is Sam's weekly activity monitoring chart. As you can see, Sam has written down a brief description of what he is doing at each hour throughout the day, and he has also recorded his mood on a scale of 0 to 10 beside each of his activities. if we look at what Sam entered in his chart on Sunday, we can see that in the morning he ate breakfast and read the newspaper and was feeling relatively depressed. After breakfast, he decided to go back to bed and stared into space for an hour, which made him feel worse and even quite anxious. He continued to stay in bed and watch television and recorded little improvement in his mood or anxiety symptoms. From this, we can see that going back to bed after breakfast was not helpful for Sam's mood. Have a go at tracking how you spend your time over the next week and record your mood beside each activity that you do. Over the next week, you may also want to carry out 1 or 2 of your committed actions that you worked on earlier in the session. We have now reached the end of session 2. We hope that you found this session helpful. In the next session of the course, we will look in more detail at what patterns you might have found from tracking your activity and mood over the week, and how you can start to make some changes to the behaviours that are having a negative impact on how you feel.